Hi, I'm Elizabeth, a literary princess. If you are new here, welcome. I'm a 6-year PhD candidate in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists. And as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have an installment in my 18th century novel project for you. We will be looking at Tom Jones by Henry Fielding, or rather, The History of Tom Jones, a Foundling, which Oxford has shortened. So we will begin with a brief history and summary of the book before moving into the major themes that I noticed and ending with my thoughts on it as a book. Please note there will be spoilers, like really major spoilers for the plot. Like there's some aspects I'm just not going to talk about at all because, I mean, look at this thing. But the major stuff I will be talking about. So if you don't want to know like the major plot points of Tom Jones, you should not keep watching this. Let's jump in. Henry Fielding was born on April 22nd, 1707. He died on October 8th, 1754. He was an upper class man, very well educated at Eton, and then went abroad for university. I forget where though. He was a magistrate, and he is actually the one who founded London's first police force, the Bow Street Runners, which is really cool. He turned to writing in 1741. The year prior, Samuel Richardson had published his first novel, Pamela, and Fielding didn't think much of it. So he proceeded to write a parody of it called Shamala. His second novel was also a parody of Pamela. It was called Joseph Andrews, and it was following the supposed brother of Pamela. Now, it started as a parody, but it eventually became what he called like a comic epic poem in prose. And that is very much what Tom Jones is as well. I do want to note though, apparently Richardson's next novel, Clarissa, Fielding actually really admired, and he wrote to Richardson like wanting to be friends, and then was shocked when Richardson didn't want to be friends with him. Like the introduction of my copy of Tom Jones called him the thin-skinned Richardson. I'm like, no, if you make your career as a novelist off of writing not one but 2 parodies of my novel, I'm not gonna like you. Like, he was shocked that Richardson didn't want to be friends with him. Like, my guy, are you kidding me? So, we've got The History of Tom Jones, a Foundling. This was his 3rd novel, published in 1749. This is another comic epic, I would say. It is a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age novel, but it is also a picaresque novel, meaning we are doing these kind of episodic traveling adventures of a kind of roguish yet likable hero, Tom Jones. But Fielding is very much engaging in like this language of epic. Like he makes lots of references to Homer and other traditional Greek and Roman works, as well as to Shakespeare, and I think he mentions Milton a few times. But so he is very much engaging in that and seems to be trying to elevate the novel above what it has been so far. So what is Tom Jones actually about? Tom Jones. Tom Jones is the illegitimate child of nobody knows who. He has been raised by Squire Allworthy, basically as his son or a nephew. Squire Allworthy also has a nephew, the son of his sister Bridget, who dies fairly early on in the book. This nephew is Mr. Blithell. So, and they are neighbors to the Western, Squire Western and his daughter Sophia, who is beautiful and the paragon of all things virtuous and feminine. So naturally, Sophia and Tom are in love. However, Squire Western wants her to marry Mr. Blifil because Mr. Blifil, I hate that name so much. Anyway, he is the heir of Squire Allworthy, and Tom Jones is just an illegitimate nobody. So Mr. Western is furious about this and is like basically trying to bully Sophia into marrying Mr. Blifil. In the meantime, Blifil is making up lies about Tom to tell to Squire Allworthy, who eventually turns Tom out of doors and says, go do your own thing. Don't come back to my house. So Tom leaves on his journey. Sophia, who despises Blifil and loves Tom, decides, I'm not staying here, and along with her maid Honor, runs away as well. We then have a very long time of them traveling on the road and each having various misadventures before we eventually end up in London, where a lot of stuff happens. How to describe what happens once we get to London? How? Sophia's father eventually catches up to her. He's still trying to bully her into marrying Blifil. Lady Belston, who she has been staying with, is trying to marry her to this lord. Lady Belston and Tom are having some kind of affair. And then Tom accidentally ends up dueling a guy and injuring him quite badly. And people think the guy might die, so Tom is arrested and goes to prison. While he is in prison, he finds out that Mrs. Waters, a woman that he met along the road and spent an evening with, let's say, it might actually be his mother. So he has inadvertently done incest, and that freaks him out. We have a whole lot of miscommunication and craziness. Eventually, Tom is let out of prison because the guy who was injured does not die and admits that the duel was his fault, that he started it. We find out that Tom is not the son of this woman who had been a girl in the village back at wherever they lived. He is actually the illegitimate child of Squire Allworthy's sister, Bridget. So he is Mr. Blifil's older brother. Blifil's scheming is revealed. He is disinherited. Tom is instated as heir, and now that Tom is going to be a man of money, Squire Western is completely fine with him marrying Sophia. Sophia and Tom work out some of their miscommunications. She has found out about his affair with Lady Belston and also the affair with Mrs. Waters. So they sort that stuff out, and they get married, and we live happily ever after. That is like the shortest, most condensed version of this book I can give you. There is so much that happens in here. And some of it's more important than others. We'll talk about that. But that is the plot at bare bones. So let's move into some of the major themes that I noticed. So the absolute biggest theme of this book, if you had to boil it down to one thing, is morality. And this idea that even though a person might do some not so great things, they might still be a morally upright person, while a person who might seem to be very morally upright can actually be a bad person. So at some point in one of the introductory chapters, so this is broken into parts, and then each part is broken into books. And the first chapter of each book is Fielding as a narrator, kind of musing on various things that might be connected to that are connected to the story of the book, but that are not like plot related. And so at this point he says, a single bad act no more constitutes a villain in life than a single bad part on the stage. So very much this, just because you do one bad thing in life doesn't mean you're evil. And that very much applies to Tom, because Tom is not the most morally upstanding citizen in the world. He sleeps around so much. He is considered wild. So Fielding, the narrator, says this upon kind of first introducing us to Tom. As we determined when we first sat down to write this history, to flatter no man, but to guide our pen throughout by the directions of truth, we are obliged to bring our hero on the stage in a much more disadvantageous manner than we could wish. And to declare honestly, even at his first appearance, that it was the universal opinion of all of Mr. Allworthy's family that he was certainly born to be hanged. Not a promising start. At one point, he is talking with Mr. Allworthy, who says to him, I am convinced, my child, that you have much goodness, generosity, and honor in your temper. If you will add prudence and religion to these, you must be happy. For the three former qualities, I admit, make you worthy of happiness, but they are the latter only which will put you in possession of it. So, like, he's a kind person, he's a generous person, but he's not prudent, and he basically needs to find God, is the gist of that. And he needs to stop sleeping around with various women, consider his actions more thoroughly, and be guided by Christian principles. And he says of himself at one point, though I have been a very wild young fellow, still in my most serious moments, and at the bottom, I am really a Christian. So yes, he's done wild things, but at heart, he is a good person. And that is very much opposed to the characterization of Mr. Blifil, his cousin / half-brother, as we eventually find out. So Fielding describes Blifil, but though he was so entirely free from the mixed passion of which we there treated, meaning like lust and love, of which the virtues and beauty of Sophia formed so notable an object, yet was he altogether as well furnished with some other passions that promised themselves very full gratification in the young lady's fortune. Such were avarice and ambition, which divided the dominion of his mind between them. He's not a good person. He wants to marry Sophia for her money. He is spiteful, he is a liar, but he's able to put on a good front so that everybody thinks that he is a good person. Although Sophia knows better, because when they were children, Sophia had this tame little songbird that I believe Tom caught for her. And one day, Blifil's like, oh, let me see the bird. So she's like, yeah, sure, and hands him the bird, and he sets it free. And then Tom goes up in a tree to try to catch the bird again because Sophia is very distressed. It ends up, like, the tree branch falls into the river, he nearly dies. But when they're all being spoken to about it after, Blifil's like, well, I think it's immoral to keep a wild animal captured. And it's like, that's not why he was really doing it. He was doing it to be a jerk. And like, yes, he's just a snot-nosed kid at that point, basically. But that basically defines his whole character, is doing things spitefully under the guise of doing them for good. So the whole book, Tom and Blifil are set up as opposites, and Fielding draws attention to this toward the very end of the book, after Blifil's villainy has been revealed, and obviously there is no question of him marrying Sophia anymore. But Tom's parentage has also been revealed, though not to Sophia, but to Allworthy. And Allworthy says to Sophia, I have a near relation, madam, a young man whose character is, I am convinced, the very opposite to that of this wretch, Blifil, and whose fortune I will make equal to what his was to have been. And then he reveals that it's Tom. So yeah, they are very much opposed. And by the end of the book, Tom is much better. So in the final chapter, we are told, whatever in the nature of Jones had a tendency to vice has been corrected by continual conversation with this good man, Allworthy, and by his union with the lovely and virtuous Sophia. He hath also, by reflection on his past follies, acquired a discretion and prudence very uncommon in one of his lively parts. So, through the power of love and a virtuous woman, and also a virtuous, morally upright mentor, he turns out okay. So this really interesting thing with morality that plays into the next theme of class. And so a lot of times when people find out that Tom is illegitimate, they automatically assume he's going to be bad. But then if they think that he might actually, be the heir to Squire Allworthy, they think, oh, well, actually, he's a great guy. I'm like, people. At one point he is staying at an inn, and at first the innkeeper has assumed he was a gentleman, but then he hears an account of Tom and finds out he is illegitimate. The Quaker, the guy is a Quaker. The Quaker was no sooner assured by this fellow of the birth and low fortune of Jones than all compassion for him vanished. But then, later on, Tom does some good things and is applauded by everybody. And Fielding says, the terms honorable, noble, and worthy gentleman resounded through the room. Nay, my landlord himself began to have a better opinion of him, and almost to disbelieve the account which the guide had given. So it's like people don't think that illegitimacy and morality can coexist. If he is illegitimate and of low fortune, he must be a bad person. But if he is of good standing, oh, he must be a good person. So, and that, the whole, the ridiculousness of that is called out toward the end of the book. So this is Mrs. Miller speaking. She is a landlady in London who Tom is staying with, who knows Squire Allworthy, and so who knows who Tom is. She says, you need not be ashamed, sir, of what you are. I promise you, no good person will esteem you the less on that account. No, Mr. Jones, the words dishonorable birth are nonsense, as my dear, dear husband used to say, unless the word dishonorable be applied to the parents. For the children can derive no real dishonor from an act of which they are entirely innocent. So Fielding is calling out this ridiculous notion that just because someone is illegitimate must mean they're a dishonorable person, which is ridiculous. However, class is a huge factor in this, and it's a huge factor into why Squire Western will not approve of a marriage between Sophia and Tom. So Squire Allworthy says to Sophia, and is it possible you can think of disgracing your family by allying yourself to a bastard? Can the common blood of the Westerns submit to such contamination? If you have not sense sufficient to restrain such monstrous inclinations, I thought the pride of our family would have prevented you from giving the least encouragement to so base an affection. So this is very much what we saw in Pamela with Mr. B's sister, berating him for marrying below his station. So too is Western berating Sophia for thinking of marrying below her station. Or not even thinking of marrying, because she's like, I'm not going to marry anyone who my father doesn't approve of, but just to think that she even likes him. And so we again get some of his thoughts from the narrator. The idea of marriage between Jones and his daughter had never once entered into the squire's head, either in the warmest minutes of his affection towards the young man, because he does actually like Tom as a person, or from suspicion, or on any other occasion. He did indeed consider a parity of fortune and circumstances to be physically as necessary an ingredient in marriage as difference of sexes, or any other essential, and had no more apprehension of his daughter's falling in love with a poor man than with any animal of a different species. Yikes. So Fielding is obviously critiquing this gross elitist attitude toward the lower classes. But that quote leads nicely into our next theme, which is another theme that we saw in Pamela. The push toward marriage for love and away from marriage for status and money. We have people very much divided into two camps within the cast of characters. We have the people who say you marry for status and fortune, and that includes Squire Western, his sister, Mrs. Western, and Mr. Bilful. And then we have the people who say, no, that's not a good thing. You should marry based on affection and based on the fact that it is a sacred institution from the church. And that includes Squire Allworthy, Sophia, Tom, and Sophia's maid of honor. Let's start with the people in the marry for status and money camp. So this is speaking about Squire Western. He treated the doubt whether the young people might like one another with great contempt, saying that parents were the best judges of proper matches for their children, that for his part he should sooner insist on the most resigned obedience from his daughter. Well, he is very much expecting Sophia to marry whoever he says, because he feels that that is what he is owed as her father. Throughout the book, he is trying to force this match. He's saying, I will make you marry him against your will. Which is awful. Now then we have his sister, Mrs. Western, who is not so much of the forcing mentality as she is the convincing mentality. So she frequently lectures Sophia. So she proceeded to read Sophia a long lecture on the subject of matrimony, which she treated not as a romantic scheme of happiness arising from love, as it hath been described by the poets, nor did she mention any of those purposes for which we are taught by divines to regard it as instituted by sacred authority. She considered it rather as a fund in which prudent women deposit their fortunes to the best advantage in order to receive a larger interest for them than they could have elsewhere. And then during this lecture, she says to Sophia, do you conceive, mistress, that in an intermarriage between kingdoms, as when a daughter of France is married into Spain, the princess herself is alone considered in the match? No, it is a match between two kingdoms, rather than between two persons. The same happens in great families, such as ours. The alliance between the families is the principal matter. You ought to have a greater regard for the honor of your family than for your own person. And if the examples of a princess cannot inspire you with these noble thoughts, you cannot surely complain at being used no worse than all princesses are used. Obviously, we are not supposed to think well of either of these people, of Mr. Western or Mrs. Western. And then Blifil is also very much of the same mind as Mrs. Western in marrying for money. He says, he was indeed perfectly well satisfied with his prospect of success, for as to that entire and absolute possession of the heart of his mistress, which romantic lovers require, the very idea of it never entered his head. Her fortune and her person were the sole objects of his wishes. So, Fielding is saying, no, this is not the way. And so we have all of these other characters who are supposed to be very likable and morally upright, who do not approve of this method of marriage. Squire Allworthy does not agree with forcing people to marry people they don't like, though he was so adverse to the rigor which some parents exercise on their children in the article of marriage, that he had resolved never to force his nephew's inclinations. So he's not trying to force this match. And when he gives his permission for it to go through, he's under the impression that Sophia is all for it. And once he finds out that she's not, he's like, nope. So he says, now to force a woman into a marriage contrary to her consent or approbation is an act of such injustice and oppression that I wish the laws of our country could restrain it. This is surely a case of that kind, for is it not cruel, nay, impious, to force a woman into that state against her will for her behavior in which she is to be accountable to the highest and most dreadful court of judicature? And to answer at the peril of her soul. To discharge the matrimonial duties in an adequate manner is no easy task, and shall we lay this burden upon a woman while we at the same time deprive her of all that assistance which may enable her to undergo it? Shall we tear her very heart from her while we enjoin her duties to which a whole heart is scarce equal? I must speak very plainly here. I think parents who act in this manner are accessories to all the guilt which their children afterwards incur, and of course must, before a just judge, expect to partake of their punishment. But if they could avoid this, good heaven, is there a soul who can bear the thought of having contributed to the damnation of his child? So Squire Allworthy feels very strongly about it, that absolutely you should not be forced into marriage because marriage is this sacred duty. And if you are forced into it with someone who you don't care for at all, you are going to be inclined to sin. So once he finds out that Sophia doesn't like Blifil, he's like, nope, not happening. It's not happening. And then I just loved this last part of his speech. It is certainly a vulgar error that aversion in a woman may be conquered by perseverance. Which is just so interesting to me that Fielding is writing this in 1749, because that is something that you still hear so much today. Like if a guy gets rejected by a girl, people are like, oh, just keep trying, you'll wear her down. No. No, that's not a good thing. I have actually heard men be given this advice by church leaders. I was like, no. Once again, we have not come very far as a society in some aspects. So we also get Honor, the maid's views on this, which are very similar, but a little bit more vulgar. She says, no father in England should marry me against my consent. And then she says something about how, well, he must not know of your aversion. And Sophia's like, no, I told him. More shame for him, cries Honor. You are to go to bed with him, and not master. So, well, you're the one that's gonna have to be sleeping with him, not your father, so why should he be making the decision? Which is an excellent point. And then we get Tom's opinion. While he is on the road, that the same guy, the Quaker, is telling him about his daughter married for love, and he won't admit her to the house now. If she wants to marry for love, then she can live on her love, even though they're gonna have nothing. And Tom says to him, but let me give you a piece of advice. Send for your daughter and son-in-law home, and don't be yourself the only cause of misery to one you pretend to love. Obviously, Tom feels strongly about this because it is what is happening to Sophia. And he truly believes you should not be forced to marry people you don't want to marry, and that you should not cause pain to people that you love by trying to force them into a marriage they don't want, or by rejecting them if they marry someone you don't really approve of. Last theme I want to talk about is Fielding's way of like talking about writing fiction. So as I said, in each of the first chapters of each book, he is more addressing the critics and other writers. So in one chapter, he gives kind of his, it's like his kind of like manifesto for writing and how it should be in the mode of realism. He says, man, therefore, is the highest subject, unless on very extraordinary occasions indeed, which presents itself to the pen of our historian or of our poet, and in relating his actions, great care is to be taken that we do not exceed the capacity of the agent we describe. Later says, the actions should be such as may not only be within the compass of human agency, and which human agents may probably be supposed to do, but they should be likely for the very actors and characters themselves to have performed. For what may be only wonderful and surprising in one man may become improbable or indeed impossible when related of another. These few restrictions, I think, every writer may be permitted to deal as much in the wonderful as he pleases. Nay, if he thus keeps within the rules of credibility, and more he can surprise the reader, the more he will engage his attention, and the more he will charm him. So he is really advocating for realism in this. Whether he fully sticks to it is a question. It's a question. Because there's definitely some improbable stuff happening here. I guess none of the stuff that happens here is outside of the range of all probability. But there's an awful lot of coincidences and, like, you know. It is obvious that he is kind of speaking to other fiction of the time and critiquing that. And it becomes extremely obvious in another chapter when I am pretty sure he is taking a dig at Richardson. He says, as several gentlemen in these times, by the wonderful force of genius only, without the least assistance of learning, perhaps without being well able to read, have made a considerable figure in the Republic of Letters, the modern critics, I am told, have lately begun to assert that all kind of learning is entirely useless to a writer, and indeed no other than a kind of fetters on the natural sprightliness and activity of the imagination, which is thus weighted down and prevented from soaring to those high flights which otherwise it would be able to reach. This doctrine, I am afraid, is at present carried much too far. And then he goes on to say the truth, I require no more than that a man should have some little knowledge of the subject on which he treats. With this alone, a writer may sometimes do tolerably well, and indeed without this, all the other learning in the world will stand him in little stead. I am apt to conceive that one reason why many English writers have totally failed in describing the manners of upper life may possibly be that in reality they know nothing of it. So one of the things that Richardson was criticized for in Pamela was that he did not accurately portray the upper classes. Like sometimes he used the wrong terms. He would call someone a lady when there is no way they could have been a lady. So the critics really harped on that, and I'm pretty sure that is a dig at this, because Fielding, as an upper-class, educated guy, seems to have had a bit of a problem with a more working-class, uneducated guy becoming such a popular writer. There's no footnote saying that that's who he's digging at, but I'm pretty sure. Like, there's a lot of other references to literature, and he does, like, kind of frame other novels in, like, a disparaging way. Like, the romances and stuff that people are reading, even, like, Robinson Crusoe and Daniel Defoe's other works are, like, mentioned by characters who you're supposed to be like, oh, they're silly or whatever. So that's very interesting that he's kind of trying to differentiate himself from other writers of the time. So that's all the themes that I wanted to talk about. What did I think of it as a book? Fielding needed to shut up. That's like, God, shut up. And now your mileage may vary with this. Some people really like Fielding's narrative voice. Dude, you talk too much. I just wanted him to get on with the plot. I actually really liked the plot. I was very invested, particularly in Sophia and her story. I will say that during the middle part where they're doing all the traveling, I got pretty bored. And that is largely because I don't like picaresque novels. That's just me. I also felt like with the depictions of some of the lower class people, like the innkeepers, Fielding was trying way too hard to be funny. And to the point where I'm like, you're not funny. Can you please move on? He gives like the backstories of these characters that do not matter at all. Like characters who you see for a few chapters and they tell you their life story. And then they never appear again and they have no bearing on the plot. Now there are a few characters who do that and they do have bearing on the plot, but there are some that just don't. So it's like, why do we need 5 chapters of this random guy's backstory? We don't. Please move on. Please. There's also a lot of classical references. I think I mentioned that earlier. And it gets kind of tedious after a while. There are times he writes in like very mock heroic style, which can be very funny, but also sometimes it's like, okay, you've gone on too long. Can we move? Can we move? I mean, this is a huge book, and I felt like it could have been half of this if he had just cut out some of the unnecessary backstories of random characters, if he had stopped trying to be funny, because I really don't think he's that funny. Sorry. Maybe that's just me as a 21st century reader not getting 18th century humor, like what happened in Gulliver's Travels for me. But I just didn't think he was funny. And I'm like, okay, can we just move the plot along? Move it along. Get back to this story about these two people who I want to see get together. Like, again, the whole plot I thought was great with him being illegitimate and then the reveal of who his mother was. I thought that was fantastic. Like, it was great. Sophia's journey of having to run away from home to avoid this marriage that she doesn't want, I thought was excellent. I mean, even the love story between her and Tom, I liked. I'm very excited to watch the mini-series of this. There are 2 of them. Because I know that those are going to cut out all of the things that I didn't like. The rambling and the random backstories that are needed and the classical references upon classical references upon Dude, the book is 900 pages. Come on. I get it. And you're not funny. So yeah, liked the plot a lot. Reading this was a slog though. I ultimately gave this 3 stars because of how much I did like the plot. And because I did think that was really good. However, it cannot go above that just because of how tedious some of this was. And again, your mileage may vary. There was somebody in the comments on my wrap-up video who has literally the exact opposite opinion of me. They're not big on the plot. They love Fielding's just narrative voice and him going off about stuff. And that's fine. This was obviously the book for them if they like that. If that's the type of thing you like, this is the book for you. If you get frustrated with that, probably not the book for you. If you want to know the story, it might be good to go to the miniseries. I haven't watched either of them yet, so I don't know how faithful it is. But And I'm wondering if that would have helped me then read the book, because that helped me a lot with Bleak House, which when I read it was like, man, Dickens, oof, come on. But when all of the stuff was cut, like all of the unnecessary stuff was cut out for the wonderful BBC miniseries, I loved that. It was great. It's a great plot. I think it's the same story with this, so I will be very interested to watch that miniseries. So that was Tom Jones by Henry Fielding. Next time we will be looking at The Female Quixote by Charlotte Lennox from 1752, I believe. Let me know down in the comments below, have you read Tom Jones? What did you think of it? Do you agree with me? Disagree with me? If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.